Good afternoon, everyone. This is Floridaman Does Weather again with another video. I know it's been a little bit since we did our last video. Me and Caleb have kind of been busy with exams and thesis projects and all that stuff. But we just wanted to get on and give everybody an update. 20 days into the beginning of the hurricane season and just kind of show everybody where we're at. It's very quiet. We'll just go ahead and start off by saying that. The first thing I have up here that I want people to look at, I know in a lot of other places you're going to look at your graphics and stuff, and people are going to talk about sea surface temps, sea surface temps, sea surface temps. We're going to get to those, but by design we're going to go to those last. First thing I have up here is what we call the shear map. Shear is arguably one of the most important ingredients in a tropical system, and as you can see, there's a lot of red, a lot of yellow, a lot of orange. Okay, your winds are coming off of Africa. We have easterly winds across the Atlantic into the Caribbean. Those easterly winds, the easterly winds are trademark for our area. That's what causes the hurricanes to start as waves off in Africa and then head east or head west. But the thing that you want, okay, for tropical cyclone development is you want, and when I say you want, I'm talking about if you're wanting a tropical cyclone to develop, okay, if one's going to develop. You want really high winds in the Atlantic that slow down in the Western Caribbean, okay, because then what that does is that causes the winds to pile up. When the winds pile up on themselves, they cause lift. They're forced to rise, and whenever they're forced to rise, that's when you start getting your low pressure systems. Well, if you look at the map right now, we don't have that. We have a streak of strong winds in the Atlantic, yes, but if you look at the Western Caribbean, you have a large streak of winds departing, exiting the region as well. That is creating a very unfavorable environment for tropical development. Now, in addition to all of this, Caleb, maybe you can get that ready too, the Saharan air layer map. If I were to look at the Saharan air layer map right now, you would see that the map would be very similar to the shear. You'll see a lot of Saharan air dust is accompanying the shear. So you've got that dry air combined with high shear, kind of acting like a blanket, kind of smothering development. I do want to show you guys this. This is something that we call the upper divergence map. Now, for tropical development, you want a system to have what they call divergence aloft. Okay, so whenever we talked about that wind piling up at the surface as the winds blow to the west from Africa, they have to go up. Okay, they pile up, they have to rise. Well, what happens when you rise? Whenever they rise, they have to go somewhere. So we have what they call divergence aloft and convergence aloft. Divergence aloft is whenever the flow spreads away from the rising column of air. Convergence is whenever the air is converging on itself. So when you have air above, it does the direct opposite of the surface. When air comes together above, it sinks. When air goes apart above, the air column rises. It's the direct opposite at the surface. When air comes together at the surface, it rises. When air departs, it sinks. So in order to have a tropical system, you have to have convergence, air coming together at the surface, air diverging at the top. Right now, we don't have that. If you look at the map here, okay, we do have a pocket of diverging air spreading out to encourage lift right off the coast of Nicaragua. But as you start looking to the east, through the Caribbean into the Atlantic, there's a lot of sinking air. That sinking air will fall in line with those strong unfavorable winds and that Saharan air mass that's coming off of the coast of Africa. So all of these pages that are still, once again, continuing this walk and holler, talking about potential storms forming and, running into the coast of the United States at 360 something hours, as they've really been doing. They seem to be particularly bad this year with that. It's not happening. As a matter of fact, I'll go so far as to say we're not going to see any development into July. Probably not till at least mid-July would be whenever we could start considering there might be an outside possibility at some development. And even then, at that point, I don't think it's going to be anything beyond a depression or a tropical storm at best. The just yes, I get it. Things can rapidly modify, but from a meteorology perspective, can't bake a cake if you don't have the ingredients, and the ingredients are not there right now. Caleb,
Mhm.
I'll go ahead and I'll hand off to you.
All right, so we'll start with the ocean. So these are our current sea surface temperature anomalies. We've got a weak um, neutral leaning slight La Nina off in the Pacific, but in the Atlantic and in the Caribbean, this Western Caribbean cooling tendency is not entirely significant because it's mainly been driven by just convection rolling over the same spots. So that's a temporary feature right there. And if any cooling is happening, it's really like a half a degree, maybe. Nothing too significant. It's not going to like last for the rest of the season. Much of this is from the repeated tropical cyclones that the Western Pacific has seen, and obviously those are going to influence the flow. Especially Eric just did that as it was strengthening off of the coast of the west coast of Mexico. It was really using basically these outer bands were slamming into the Yucatan repeatedly the past couple days, and that has contributed to some of the cooling out there as well. And then as we go into the Atlantic, just that consistent long fetch of wind that's been coming off of the African coast has allowed for a degree of upwelling to consistently be occurring out here, but it's minor upwelling. Still, everything is heating up in general out there. I'll actually go ahead and pull up the other map right now. So this is your sea surface temperature anomaly change. So there is some heat building. This is showing some cooling that is still just kind of inaccurate because overall your oceanic heat content is continuing to build in the Western Caribbean and the Gulf. And it is starting to build, at least on the surface, a little bit more out here in the Atlantic development region. So eventually, we are going to get into that favorable phase where everything kind of starts to line up, but that is going to be into July, like Josh said. I've been watching the forecast for the MJO to kick in, and it's been mainly in phases that are consistent with what we've been seeing, where it favors the Pacific side of things more. And that's why they're already on their fifth named storm out there. And we haven't seen anything because oftentimes when you get tropical development out here, it's venting out into the Gulf and into the Caribbean. So that's adding to the substance, the sinking air that we feel on this side. So it's been hard for anything to really get going amid that shear and amid that constant bit of sinking air. But that will change coming into mid-July. It looks like we're going to get into at least a weekly favorable MJO phase for the Gulf, Caribbean, and maybe even a bit of the Western Atlantic. So we'll have to watch that. But I'll go overall and just show sea surface temperatures. You know, everything's hot enough. It's just nothing's been able to stack. So these tropical systems, they're kind of a pancake of low pressures. Like you have one at the surface, a little bit in the lower levels, a mid level, and then a high pressure venting type of thing above that. If you can't get those to stack, and it's just coming from latent heat release from all this convection, it's just going to create its own low pressures essentially and just feedback loop on itself. But you need those things to stay in one spot for a while. If you can't get that, you'll just have these waves. And we've seen a couple of tropical waves try to make it over, but I think the first one that tried to make it over was traveling into an area of pretty hot Saharan dust. So eventually that fizzled out. But the more successive waves we get, the more it washes that dust out. So if we start seeing just a parade on parade on parade of waves, that'll help wipe that dust out, and that'll add another favorable condition of a moist and slightly cooler atmosphere in which these systems can form. So
Now, for those of you who haven't had a chance to see the sorry, there's a fly flying around here. Those of you who haven't had the chance to see our tropical weather video, the MJO is just an acronym for the Madden-Julian oscillation, and what that does is that's describing the pattern of upper level convergence and divergence as it travels in waves around the world, oscillates. The convergence and divergence patterns oscillate around the world. And what Caleb was describing is currently right now, all of the convergence in our region is over the Eastern Pacific, which is why they have five named storms. And the unfavorable portions and the neutral portions have been over on our side, which is not helping with the development. So that's just a the MJO in a nutshell. We'll do another video describing it uh, one of these days. But just for time being, just understand unfavorable MJO means there's convergence upstairs, air sinking, whereas a favorable MJO would be divergence aloft, air is rising.
yeah. So the next thing I want to go over is this weekend's heat and the sea breeze storms for Florida. So we're going to get into a very favorable pattern. The last 2 days, the steering flows over Florida have been pretty much neutral. So these storms haven't had much to organize on. And by organize, I mean like kind of broadly organized because you need good cheer for organization. But if you have flow, things can at least propagate close to their own outflow. On days like today, you'll get a storm that pops up, doesn't really move, and then the outflow comes out, and it's just going to dictate wherever that strongest push of outflow is, that's got kind of the most surface convergence, is where a new cell is going to pop off. So there was one in Riverview earlier that was just stationary. The strongest push of outflow was kind of to the south, and that's where new cells form. So that's the kind of stuff we're dealing with. But as we get into the weekend, another area of high pressure is going to develop centered kind of over the Carolinas, Virginia area, and you can already see we're into Sunday and it's there. So we're going to have a big heat dome across the eastern US and then down into Florida, easterly and southeasterly flow. That is exactly what we like to see for this side. That gives us our best storms. This was actually pretty similar to the flow pattern when we caught those funnel clouds on those storms not that long ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. Go check that video out if you haven't. It's nice. And we like to see that. Easterly flow and southeasterly flow are some of the best friends of the west coast of Florida. And this looks like it's going to continue into next week. So we're going to have pretty good convection on this side very consistently coming up as we get into next week. And then eventually that ridge over the central, I mean, not central, but southeastern US will start to give way and phase out. And then as we get deeper into the end of June, it really just becomes a very elongated ridge. And now we're kind of late in the model run, so it's getting a little wonky,
It
more
started to degrade.
disagreement. Yeah. But the general pattern is the ridge will back off into the Atlantic. And that matches up with things becoming slightly more favorable in July because, as you can see, the winds start to slow down a little bit. And then once they get into the Gulf, they really start to slow down. So if we get into an MJO phase 8 or 2, those are pretty favorable for Gulf upper level divergence. So that's when we need to watch. I believe 8 and 2 are favorable for like pretty much this entire Gulf, Western Caribbean region. So we'll have to watch for any development of a Central American gyre that could spit some stuff off. And we're starting to think that might be the dominant feature for tropical development this year,
Yes.
given how much dust is coming off of the Sahara. So why don't we just go ahead and check out some of the member things on here. So we broke this down before. This is just showing you essentially where a bunch of different inputs are outputting low and high pressure locations. So we're just going to look at this out of curiosity. I don't expect anything other than East Pacific stuff to show for right now, but it's always something to look at. So there you go. You got the East Pacific getting new development by next week. So the F name storm is possibly coming. If you plan on going to the west side of Mexico or down to Central America anytime soon, keep an eye on that. And then as we just continue, your disagreement grows, but there's actually fairly decent agreement on location of the Bermuda High. So if that starts to back off, that's something I really watch for because then it allows this channel to open up for your tropical waves to really make it into the Western Caribbean, Eastern Caribbean, and the Gulf. So as long as that signal gets more consistent and grows, we will gain confidence in something possibly developing in July. Not saying it's going to hit the U.S., but with this channel opening up, definitely leaves the possibility for at minimum the Caribbean to get strikes, and we'll just have to keep an eye on that. It's going to get interesting for sure. And then as we get later into the run, everything just wonks out. But I think at least up to hour 200, there is a fair amount of agreement on the Bermuda High at least backing off for some time.
Very good. Anything that we think we need to tie in? I know basically from my end, I'd say confidence is pretty high. We're not going to see any um, any major tropical development for at least 2, maybe 3, 4 weeks. Mid-July at best. Like you said, the Bermuda High will be retreating, but it's going to take a while for dust to wash out. If the dust washes out,
Mm-hmm.
I do strongly feel the Central American gyre will be where all the party is going to be this year. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see. Anything you want to add to that, Caleb?
No, I think that ties it up together pretty well. With this pattern as well, that I was talking about with that big high pressure center over the southeast, another thing to watch for, at least on the severe weather side, is the ring of fire. Now, if you live in the mid-Atlantic, Ohio, you're familiar with this at least in part. The 2012 derecho, that was basically it. You had a ridge riding derecho, nice big serial derecho. So we're gonna have to watch kind of how these systems progress. Right now, we got a low pressure system that is forming up in Wyoming, deepening, and is going to be moving into South Dakota and sparking a severe weather outbreak out there today. But the tendency for these is to kind of ride into Canada and then they'll leave some type of boundary behind. Now, that could be stationary front, some super slow moving cold front, but there's just a tendency there for something to be left behind to kind of act as a instability gradient. So we'll have to keep an eye on it out for that, especially with how consistent the flow is going to be over there. If you've got like a good solid 40, 50 knots of flow, you could easily get a big squall line out of that any day, really. But other than that, yeah, nothing expected in the tropics for a while. We'll be getting some good sea breeze storms though, so that'll be fun.
Keep an eye out for more footage because we're going to be having fun this upcoming week.
Hmm.
All right, everybody, you have a good afternoon. Stay tuned for more videos, like I said, in the next few days from me and Caleb. Sea breeze pattern is going to be active. It means we're going to be out filming, hopefully getting some more good stuff. Thanks. Have a great evening.